This needs to grow back faster than this. See if I can get this to grow back a little bit faster. I can't stand the difference in my face with this shaved. Anyway, I have been contemplating a potentially new video concept here. I've been goofing around with my projects, and one of the things that happens all the time when I'm working on projects is, oh, I got to go look this up. And you do a little bit of research on what you want to go look up. And as you're doing the research, there's this little link that leads you off into another direction. And you chase that, and it leads you down a rabbit hole you never thought you'd, like, there's no way you could ever anticipate going down the paths that I end up going down. So I think it would be kind of fun to do a series of videos about the rabbit hole that I go down on a given day. So today's rabbit hole is, and just sort of walk people down that process, because I'll tell you what, it's amazingly fun to go down these rabbit holes for me. And if anybody else has even a remotely amount of fun that I have with that, I think it would be entirely possible to have an interesting series of videos, especially with a lot of people at home with time on their hands where they're trying to figure out how they can enjoy or distract themselves. So what we've got is, one of the ones that I ended up following down the rabbit hole of today was the cryptids. But before that, I got to see if I can pull up this list of all the things I've been doing. Oh, the things since yesterday. I feel like 21 hours ago was when I found it. It was after I shot my video last night. It's about the conlangs. And I had been playing around with constructed languages that were trying to find the minimum number of letters required to build a language. And the two that I think I talked about yesterday were, I don't know if I even mentioned them by name, but Hawaiian is one of the languages. Hawaiian has, let's see, it has it's A-E-I-O-U, and then a double or a long version of each of those. So double A, double E, double I, double O, double U. But it also has the letters H, K, L, M, N, P, W, and a glottal stop, which is called Okina, I believe is it. And so, not counting Okina, you have H, K, L, M, N, P, W, 7 consonants. And you only really have 5 vowels. Some of them you do long with an accent. 5 and 7, you're having 12 letters in your alphabet, with the 13th being a little stop, that is Okina. So doing some of that research earlier today, actually, I did find a site that's supposedly taking Hawaiian lessons on YouTube. So I could definitely link to that person's site. I am tempted because I find this actually quite fascinating. And I'll tell you why. I had done research on this. I'd done research on Rotokas, which is a language from part of Papua New Guinea. And they have A-E-I-O-U double A, double E, double I, double O, double U. Okay, so very similar. But then G, K, P, R, S, T, V. And we're looking at, this is one less letter. It doesn't have the glottal stop that Hawaiian does. And its choice of letters is slightly different. I want to actually see if I can pull it up parallel, because I've been making notes on here all day long. But so with the Hawaiian, we have, it's interesting to also take a look at the history of the languages to see where things disappeared. But Hawaiian used to have P and B. It dropped the B and just kept the P. K is often allied or paired with T, the letter T as in toast. So you have K and toast, or K and T as a pair, which you don't generally see. When you look at pairings of consonant sounds in English, at least, you see T and D, TH. But T and D usually are paired together. But here's the thing. In Hawaiian, there were a triplet of sounds that were grouped together that they dropped two of them, L, R, and D. Now, remember when we were talking the other day about some of the Asiatic languages, they tend to have, they do not tend to use L or that sort of sound in their writings because they use the sound differently than we do. The tendency is to think like a direct translation of like, oh, this is their A sound, this is their R sound. You have to realize that these are different populations that developed developed their sounds distinct of whether or not it's a certain consonant. And apparently in the East Asiatic countries, the sound that you get from that is a little bit of an so it has that little bit of a L, has a little bit of the R, and just a smidge of a sound in there. And I've never seen it shown in a language, but when I looked at the Hawaiian language and saw that it had an LRD and it dropped the R and the D, I was like, oh, wow, you get to see it in existence. And I just thought that was really fascinating. It's total geekandry on my part, and I know it, but the other thing, so let me see if I pull up here so I make sure I got everything going on right here. But the other, yeah, so the other thing I will say is, come on, wake up. Taking your time there. I've been overloading this thing all day long. Going down, got so many tabs open right now. So many tabs, and many of them are for languages that I have no business trying to learn. But, and that's the other thing about this is I kind of want to learn some of these languages now. The problem is, like, I'm never going to use these for anything other than constructed languages. So, like, it's not super practical or particularly valuable to end up playing with these languages. So there are other languages that would be far more valuable for me to learn, but they're not the ones that have my interest right now. So anyway, going back, so on Hawaiian, they have an H sound, but they don't have any S or SHs or anything like that. And then above that is the VW, where supposedly they've dropped the V and predominantly just use the W now. And then M and Okina. So Looking at that list, here's an interesting thing. There's a system of memory improvement techniques that help you run numbers, and it's called the major system. And the major system takes consonant sounds, 9 consonant sounds, 9 consonant sounds, there we go, that you can use to each one representing a different number, and then sometimes you have one for 0 as well. And what you do is you have one letter that represents 1 letter that represents 2, and then you build simple words, usually like a 2 or 3 letter word that uses the phonetic sound of that consonant and only vowels besides that, or some of the silent or unused sounds as well. So the major system for memorization uses, this is pretty funny, PB sound. So right there, we already match on number 9 for the, all right, well, I guess it's usually number 9 is PB for the major system. I'm adjusting the positions on these for some other purposes, but so Hawaiian in the major system have a PB, an N, a K, an L, an M, a V. That one's a little bit of a hit or miss because in the major system, it's V, F, and PH sounds. So all the V, F sounds. Whereas in Hawaiian, they had VW, but they've sort of dropped their V and it's predominantly W now. And then on top of it, Hawaiian used to have an R that they've dropped. And the major system has an R. And Hawaiian has the T that they do as pairing it with their K. But they dropped the T for the most part. You still use it a little bit. Sometimes if the sound would come at a different place in a word, they'd opt in for T instead of K. But in the major system, T is paired with D at the top of at number 1. So if you have the word like hat, because H is a silent or a breathing sound without necessarily a lot of consonant sound itself, it's counted as a neutral tone. And A is a vowel, so HA is essentially missing. And then the T is the sound. So number 1 is T. And so if you were to come across a large number, every spot in there, you could replace every number 1 with a T. Now, as you take the major system and you expand it further, you have the ability to take paired numbers as words with that pair of letters in it. So in this case, if we say 1 is T and 9 is P, you could do something along the lines, a number 1 and a number 9. So 19 might be something along the lines of top, whereas a number 9 followed by a number 1, so a 91 might be something like pit. And that's how you use the major system. But I find it absolutely fascinating that with the major system, you're sort of restricting the consonants you have to 9 consonants, 10 sort of, because 0 is usually referred to as being S. So you have the ability to do, you're sort of restricted. the 9 sounds that you're more likely to get, there's a lot of doubling up. So P and B are doubled up. K, C, and G, the hard G sound, those are all piled on to one of the numbers. And then the V, F, P, H are piled on. And then CH and SH and J, the sh, ch, and j, or j, are all piled onto the same number. But they sort of all break down into phonetic families. And those phonetic families happen to match really well with what the Hawaiian language uses as its consonants. And so if you were to actually use the consonants only from Hawaiian, you would actually only have this 7, not counting the Okina glottal stop. And that exists as the, I think the example I heard that best represents it in English would be something like saying, uh-oh, that you are essentially doing a break in the word without necessarily breaking the word. So it's that stop in the middle of a sound. It's not oh, it's not O-H, O-H, it's uh-oh. And that pop in the middle to split them, that is what Okina is meant to be used for. And they count it as a distinctive letter, a sound. So when you have the symbol they use for it usually is the apostrophe in there. So with that, you are missing 2 letters still. And it's pretty much like looking at it, it's a fair match for the fact that they count their T and their K next to each other, and they don't really have the D. So they count T and K together, and they used to count LRD as together, whereas in the major system, T and D go together, R is separate from L, and L is separate from everything else. So that's the biggest discrepancy there. So pulling that R, dropped R and pulling that secondary T as a second letter, you can flesh it out so that Hawaiian is a amazingly good option for a major system memorization technique. Now, that's Hawaiian without the vowels, which is something I'm going to get to here in a second. I think I talked about it last night with Abjab. I think that's how you pronounce it. There are certain letters, like Hebrew used to be a language where there were no indicators for vowels. You just had to assume what they were. And Egyptian does something similar, where our tendency now to look at Egyptian script is it really translates phonetically in most cases as specifically having only consonants. Now, some of them are consonant sounds that contain a sort of the vowel modifier. So it would be we, wo. But the missing the missing vowels are something that's pretty common in Egyptian. And when a lot of people do translation of Egyptian, they just add the E sound in. So the addition of a lot of, it's one of the reasons we don't really know how ancient Egyptian would sound, because we don't know how they would have ascribed a vowel addition between their consonants. Like they didn't do kwudit as a KWD. They had sounds that they modified their consonants with, So it would have been, maybe it was Cowid or Cowid or Cowid or Code. But we don't know necessarily how they used to pronounce those things. Taking a similar approach to this is what you do for the major system, where you take your 9, 10 letters, or 10 letters, numbers, and you code them together with just the consonant sounds. And the reason you do that is it gives you the opportunity, when you come across a string of numbers, like the barcode on a product, where you would do something along the lines of 04000555421 for this packet, that's the barcode. Now you can memorize that number relatively easily, because what you're doing is you're taking double sets of those numbers, and in some cases triple sets of those numbers, and you're encoding them as the consonants of a word. But if you were to encode them as consonants and vowels, you're going to get gibberish. But if you just do the consonants, you can actually say, like, a 0 would be S. 4, I believe, it's been a while, I think 4 is R. And then 0, 0, 0, 0. What you have in that case is going to be a lot of S's and an R. So you have S, R, S, 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 S. But I can take them in sets of 3, where I can find a word that's going to be S, R, S. So soars. And then 333 is S, 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 or the 000 is S, S, S. And I could put in there SA, SI. So it would be something along the lines of sissies. So what we have there is soars, sissies. And you have two things that you can use as visual aids to help you make a story about soars and two sissies, or soars and sissies, and make the soars on sissies. Now you have a visual image, one sentence that tells you 6 of your letters, or 6 of your numbers, when you decode it back. And so that's how you use the major system. The fact that you can put in whatever vowels help you form a word out of that is what makes it work. You have sort of the same option to do that with the consonants used in Hawaiian, but the trick is Hawaiian linguistically is so vowel heavy that you run the risk of making very confusing nonsense if you don't use the vowels right. So it's a very interesting way to play with it, because here's the other thing. In my research and my wandering around last night, I encountered I talked about what is it? I forget the name of Rotokas alphabet and the Hawaiian alphabet as being some of the smallest alphabets. Well, it turns out about a century or so ago, there was a Frenchman who was having some fun. Well, not really having some fun. He was trying to develop a linguistic approach to a common language, or a musical approach to a common language that anybody could use. And the trick with a lot of international languages is they're usually founded by somebody who builds them around their own language. So Esperanto is very heavily influenced by Romance languages and has very little to do with things like Asiatic languages. But this creator of this language that I'm going to talk about, this Frenchman, built a language that he was thinking building around 7 notes of the musical scale. And so the way he did this was do, re, mi, fa, sol. They do S-O-L. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si. S-I is how they ended over in France. So he didn't fully escape the influence of his own language. But, and it's to his detriment too, which I thought was surprising. Because when you look at that, D-R-M-F-S-L-S, and it hurts the language. But the way we do it over in the US, at least, is do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. So the last one is a T for us. Now, do you recognize a few of these kinds of concepts here? We've got T, L, M, R, F, S, L. I think the biggest difference between the musical scale and the major system in Hawaiian are that we have an S instead of an H like in Hawaiian, but the major scale has an S as a 0, and we have separated T and D as 2 different tones at the start of the musical scale. So do and T on either end. And so it's like, this is very close. The musical scale uses fa instead of V. The major scale has V, F, and PH. The musical scale has F, and Hawaiian has VW, has predominantly dropped the use of the V and is just using W now. But the musical scale only has 7 notes in it, so we're missing the N, and we're missing the P, and we're missing the CH, SH, and J sound, which are not a huge loss, honestly. You don't have to use those. Hawaiian doesn't have those sounds either for the most part. Now, that's very interesting. He built the Frenchman. I want to remember his name. What's his name? I should say his name, not just call him the Frenchman. Francois Suter. So he built this language with this concept in mind. And the thing that's fascinating to me about this is it's so close to matching up with the notes of the musical scale, but they also equated it to the colors, and that's down to Isaac Newton. Isaac Newton, when he built his understanding of the rainbow from prisms casting the rainbow on a wall, he built it around the premise of a musical scale. So he is the reason, to the bane of my existence, they equate it to red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. Because here's the thing. We have 3 primary colors and 3 secondary colors. Red, yellow, blue are our primary colors. Now you could switch it up if you're doing something like chromatic light spread, but for right now, sticking to the red, yellow, blue. Your secondary colors are going to be orange because it's intermediate between red and yellow, green because it's intermediate between yellow and blue, and purple is intermediate between red and blue. There is no indigo in your primary and secondary pairings. There are 6 colors on the spectrum. But here's the thing. Everybody got into this pattern of using Roy G. Biv, and Newton got into this pattern of matching a color to each of the notes in the scale of music. So you start with the first note. A C is going to be red. And then you go through each note, a whole note. So you're going to have C. So do is red, re is orange, mi is yellow. God, my screen needs to be cleaned. Fa is green. Sol is blue. And then they have la as indigo, or maybe they have that as blue. I'm not sure how they're counting blue or indigo. But, and then the violet is T or C. And so they have this whole means of matching a color to each of the notes. And it's a little bit of a frustration for me because I want to play with it a little bit more. But so you have these notes. You also have a means of doing 7 hand gestures for each of the notes. And so when you build a language with 7 components, and you make, basically they're syllables. You have 7 syllables that you can make matched sets of. And let's see if I can get a better description here. It's called sol res sol, or sol re sol. It's so let's see. What's the full description? There are a couple different versions of it that have been produced over time. And part of that is down, and it's one of my pet peeves about it right now so far, is it relies heavily on modifiers, so accents and stresses. And some of the newer forms that people have applied to it move around that factor, because what you're really looking at that point is you have a means of, through colored lights, through musical notes, or saying words that are essentially sol, re, so, that is a word. Sol, re, so is a word. They're syllables of a word. So you have spoken, musical, light-based means of communicating. Now, there are methods that you can use hand gestures as a sign language where 7 different hand gestures represent different syllables. And you build a giant dictionary full of different sounds that you can produce. But note the important aspects of these things. The individual syllables that you use here are dictated less by their individual sound. You could turn do, re, mi into hey, day, K, K. So it doesn't really matter what sound you give them. They're just 7 symbols or 7 syllables that you're using to construct your language. So going back to that, we have that same kind of structure in Hawaiian. We have 7 sounds, not including the glottal stop, that you can use. And I'm like, this is matching up really, really well. The other aspect of sol, re, sol is that it doesn't matter what vowel you add to the syllable. Your syllable really just has to have 7 distinct consonant sounds, and they could all have the same vowel sound and it wouldn't matter. You could literally do do, ro, mo, and just go up the whole scale that way. And they could literally all have the same sound. Do, ro, mo, fo, sol, la, lo, to. And you've built all 7 that you need from that. You can swap in A and it's de, re, me, fe, se, le, te. And it still works. So you can chunk in whatever vowel you want on that to construct words. This is getting very similar to the major system. It's not quite right for Hawaiian, because Hawaiian requires that you get your vowels right to make a word that makes any sense. But with the sol, re, sol, as a language base, it's a little limited because he structured it in such a way that you have single syllable words, double syllable words, triple syllable words, and quadruple syllable words was mostly what they fleshed out. And I think where that deposits you is by default. Okay, so no. So the way they built this is that through this structure, there are not many, if any, commonly accepted 5-syllable words. And what that ends up meaning is the total number of words available in sol, re, sol is under 3,000 words as it stands right now. I was trying to see if I could find the actual number here. Where is it? Sol, re, sol. I can't seem to get the language data here. Where is it? So we're looking at vocabulary. And it's a gendered language, so it's very much has that in common with a lot of the Romance languages. And the part of the problem with the way they built it, with the way the creator made this language, is that the designation of male or female gender to a given word is chunked in at the end of the sentence. So gendering the sentence or phrase, it's a weird way of doing it. And it's done through a stress rather than a letter or a letter pairing. And so that problem is one that overlaps with the fact that they do different stresses for nouns versus what is it? By default, all inanimate nouns and pronouns imply that they are all male sex. To differentiate the female sex, you add a bar or a hyphen or a macron to the final syllable of the corresponding article of the word itself. It's a cluster mess of trying to get that to work right. And so, like, if you're speaking it, if you're saying do, re, mi, stressing or a glottal stop separating repeating vowel sounds is how you would put that emphasis on something. But here's the thing, in a piece of music, that's not as easily done. It looks good on paper, and when speaking the name of each note, you can kind of do it. But musically playing it, it doesn't translate as well. How do you accent a note without changing the note at any point? And then there's a feature of this also that I'm trying to remember what the actual trick to this was. It's very tricky about trying to work around the limitations of what the path they've set for themselves is. So grammar, apart from stress and length of sound, solare sol words are not inflected. To keep sentences clear, especially with the possibility of information loss while communicating, certain parts of speech follow a strict word order. Adjectives always follow the noun they modify. Indirect objects always come after the verb. Tenses always precede verbs. To make a word plural, and this is one of the other ones, to make a word plural, you place an acute accent above the last syllable, again, with the accent above the syllable, which in speech is pronounced by lengthening the last letter. Remember we talked about lengthening or accenting a letter gives it a feminine. So if you have a word and you lengthen it, it's not always clear if you're making it feminine or plural. And what do you do when you make something both feminine and plural? And then it says this only affects the first word in a noun phrase. That is, it only affects a noun when the noun is alone, as above. If the word is accompanied by grammatical particle, la, fa, lasi, the particle will take the gender and or number marking instead. And so, like, this is a mess. It's not very clean and straightforward. And then parts of speech, as well as more specific definitions to certain words, are derived from verbs by placing a circumflex above one of the syllables. Again, a mark that works in text, but isn't as clear otherwise. And by pronouncing said syllable with rinfosando, sudden emphasis or crescendo. So now you're talking about stressing or volume on certain parts. And so it's just sort of like this kind of impedes its ability to function. And then there's another thing of asking questions isn't as clearly distinguishable in the base form of this. So some of the other languages are trying to work around some of the problems of this. But they did come up with 7 symbols that they could use that are letters that you could use in writing. And the writing system is actually really awesome to see. I very much like the writing system. And I may co-opt that writing system for my Dwarvish conlang. the other thing, I'm sort of a sidetrack from my adventures today, was when looking at, it's funny, the original purpose that I set out to work on is now a sidetrack to what I actually did today. But the written form of the conlang, as it's set out, is very versatile in being able to write whole words as if they're a symbol, which is really neat. But the additional part of this is when you really look at taking a word like sol, so, re, do, mi, and you really look at the Slavic languages, the tendency we think of when thinking of a Russian accent or a Slavic accent is their resounding vowel sounds with some of their harsh, clickier, I don't want to say harsh, that's not appropriate, but abrupt consonant sounds. And so, like, I do really think that borrowing some of this idea may work well for a pseudo-Slavic language. The thing about Slavic languages, I looked up the Cyrillic alphabet. The Cyrillic alphabet, I believe, how many letters did that have? It had more than the standard English alphabet. And some of the ones that they use, their distinction between two different sounds is so subtle that I wouldn't have caught it. Like, if my ear is not trained to catch the difference between two or three of some of their sounds. And so those language differences, like, I can build my conlang to not deal with those sound-alike sounds. So I can trim some of those letters out. And I can even trim out some that don't, like, you can trim some out that would regularly be used in the language and not compromise the ability to still sound like the language. And so I may be able to take the Cyrillic language, reduce it phonetically to a set of simple sounds that I can pair with the vowel sounds and use the consonants as each of the symbols. So again, moving sort of into the range of the Hawaiian language, and do the consonant sounds matched with the sort of markings that you can delineate which vowel sound you're throwing in to get a very Slavic sound. And I can use the writing system they use here as a means of delineating the glyphics that they use to create that. And so I think that's really where I'm going to end up going. But yeah, that's sort of part of my adventure here. And it's so much more involved than this. Like, this is just part of what I ended up getting into. I did get majorly derailed by exploring this concept even further. Specifically, I'm now sort of fascinated with the Sol Re Sol. There's a version of it called SES, and that's because Sol is SOL is one of the syllables. But like we said, the vowel is irrelevant. It could be sel, sal, whatever. The L is an addendum that the French used. We do do, re, mi, fa, so, la, ti, do. We're missing the L on the end of it. So if it's SO for us, and the vowel is irrelevant, it's just S. And so re, instead of doing the R and the E, they've opted for expressing the E as the important part of that one, and then hit it with the so again. So it's ses is what they've done for this one. This version does do that shortening, the contraction of the monosyllabic. And they've done something, because plurals and feminine forms of words in sol, re, sol are indicated by stress or length of sound. SES uses PAU, P-A-U, the word for some, or FAI, many, to indicate the plural, and MU, the word for well, to indicate the feminine when necessary. So they've stepped outside of the using of stresses and using a modifier, like a prefix or a suffix, to modify the words in such a way that you get rid of some of that stressor being needed to use it. So I like that a lot, but we still have some issues in the base of the language. And one of the things I want to do is I want to see if I can move it up towards a way I can use it for a major system. But because it's structured around the musical notes, you don't really have the option of saying like, oh, well, we'll do 3 more notes on top of the 7. You're crossing over a boundary at that point. There's an octave. There are 8 notes in an octave, and an octave begins and ends on the same note. So when you take an octave and you remove the duplicate note, you have the 7 notes that we're using. Sort of, because there are these semitones. The 7 notes that we use are the tones, sort of. A couple of them are a semitone apart. But when you look at the keys of a piano, what we're using for the 7 notes are the white keys. There are 5 black keys on a piano that we could also be adding as notes. But the problem with that is 7 plus 5 is 12. Wait a minute. Didn't we have a language that used 12 notes or 12 sounds? Yes, Hawaiian and Rotoko, or whatever it is. Rotoka, I believe it is. Yes, I think so. Rotokas. Anyway, so you have these languages that have 12 sounds. I think we're getting there. Do I dare use semitones as our vowels? If I do, we have 12 sounds for the piano and 12 sounds for the spoken. But the major system equates each sound to its own number. 12 digits isn't really how our math works. But there is a mathematics system that uses a base 12 math. So a base 12 math, it turns out, has some advantages over a base 10 math. So now I'm in the mindset of, am I going to be playing around with alternative mathematics systems to accompany my alternative conlang? Oh man, there's some real potential in this. There's some very interesting opportunities here. Like if we bump sol, re, sol into a 7, or from a 7 to a 12 note musical chromatic scale, then it still works for music. And here's something else interesting. Remember my issue with the color spectrum? Red, blue, yellow, and then orange, green. That's a hard word. Orange, green, and purple is 6. But wait, that's the primary, secondary. Believe it or not, there's tertiary colors. And those tertiary colors, let's see if I can get out to the front and see if I can, they're not named what I want them to be named just because I'm a stickler. If we're going to have people throwing around the concept of indigo, you best believe that my instinct tells me that it belongs in the tertiary. But what we actually have here is, the way it's usually referred to is red, vermilion, orange, amber, yellow, chartreuse, green, teal, blue, violet, and purple. And then magenta is the last one. There are 12 colors, 12 notes, we have the possibility here. Now, it would require doing some upgrading of their font, their letter forms, and tweaking their hand signals to contain 12 instead of 7. But if we do this right, it may also increase the number of vocabulary words that we can build off of that base 12. And base 12 mathematics makes it way easier to see in a pattern where your prime numbers are, and it makes it way easier to do most of your fractions. Now, certain things like the fifths and the sevenths aren't super easy to do, but a third in base 12 is just a one-place decimal point, or a duodecimal point. So a third, a sixth, all of these things are so much more easier to express in base 12 math. And there's some indicators that base 12 math is also easier to learn as multiplication and division tables. And I saw somebody, and it was a little bit over my head, but somebody was indicating that it may have more implications in the realm of physics, that it matches patterns better in that sense. So it's very interesting to me that if we did this base 12 math system with this base 12 conlang, that we may be able to structure it in ways that are way more versatile for us, for our needs. And we could probably use it with the major system. That's the other thing we have to modify at that point. Instead of doing a base 10 major system, do a base 12. And then you still have the ability to, man, it's going to be very interesting. And like, here we are, like my click language that I talked about yesterday, I'm bouncing my head off of constructing a language that's going to be a challenge to learn when I don't need to make it that detailed. But my fascination with approaching it has just been so sucked in that I can't just let it go. So I've been playing with that a lot today. I do think I would love to do a series of videos of going down the rabbit hole. That I would just, lead people down the line. Like, I'm sure none of it's sticking, and it doesn't have to stick right now, but the talking about what I learned about the Hawaiian alphabet, the talking about the clicking alphabets, or the clicking languages, talking about the things I learned when researching, I already knew the major system, but going down the line of all these little side paths that catch my attention and I follow and learn new things and explore concepts in new ways. Like, that's a fun little diversion for my nerdy brain, and I'm sure other people would find this just as interesting. So I'm thinking I may do that. I may just do a series of videos where going down the rabbit hole today. Let's see what we figure out and what we can talk about that I learned. So that's one of the things that's on my mind today. We're at an hour. I could probably talk another hour about it. I'll save it for tomorrow. Hope you're doing all right. Take care. Have a wonderful evening, and I will catch you tomorrow.